Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at Interordnance, aka Royal Tiger Imports, taking a look at some of the cool, rare, and interesting firearms that they are importing out of Ethiopia. They've been doing this for a couple years now, and today we have a Pistole 1001-0. This is an East German copy of the Walther PP. Now, the story is of how these got here. Like, why are these in Ethiopia? Well, the short version is there was, in the 1970s, there was a communist revolution in Ethiopia that threw out Haile Selassie and put the Communist Party in control. That, of course, changed the geopolitical state of Ethiopia. Instead of getting aid, military and otherwise, from the West, they started getting it from the communist bloc. And East Germany, in particular, supplied quite a lot of aid, both military aid and agricultural and other humanitarian aid, to Ethiopia after the communist revolution there. And so among many other things, Ethiopia got military aid from virtually everybody over the course of a couple hundred years, but they actually have a bunch of interesting East German pistols that we don't typically see over here. This is one of them. So the backstory on how these were produced essentially starts with the Allied occupation of Germany. The Walther plant at Zella Mehlis is captured by American forces, who proceed to do a very thoroughly American job of looting all of the guns out of the factory to take home as souvenirs, but the factory eventually comes into the Soviet zone of control in what becomes East Germany. So Karl Walther, the Walther Company, abandons the plant and they relocate to Ulm in West Germany to set up new operations. And they would begin by subcontracting manufacture to the French firm of Makarov, which is an entirely separate subject for a whole different series of videos. What happens to the Walther equipment and tooling and everything in the factory in Zella Mehlis? Well, it falls under Soviet control. And the Soviets, as they're setting up the government of East Germany, they distribute a lot of that material to other factories in the area. Suhl in East Germany is a large, historically significant weapons manufacturing area. And the Soviets and East Germans, put together essentially one big state-owned weapons manufacturing conglomerate in Suhl, and they call it the Ernst Thalmann Werke. Thalmann was a leading figure in the German Communist Party in the interwar period. He was actually a candidate for president of Germany in 1932. He failed, of course, and was arrested in 1933, thrown into prison, kept in prison until ultimately he was shot at Buchenwald on Hitler's direct orders in 1944. So he shows up in a number of places as essentially a German communist martyr. And so they named this weapons production facility after him. That facility would manufacture a bunch of other guns as well. But focusing specifically on this, in 1947, a team of engineers begin the process of basically rebuilding and redeveloping the Walther PP from the tooling and the drawings that are left in Zella Mehlis. This is like the East Germans have a bunch of older Walther pistols, and the Thalmann Werke will do a lot of work refurbishing and rebuilding them, building ones from new old stock parts that what they do have available. But they decide they actually want to start new production. These are guns that are going to be used by the East German military, as well as various state security organizations, and also the Volkspolizei, the People's Police, the DDR police. Sorry. So, at this time, weapons manufacture in occupied Germany is not allowed under international treaty. This is why, for example, the French stopped manufacturing guns at the Mauser plant. But the Soviets want to continue this production, so they do so in secret. So that's why the gun is given the designation of 1001-0. 1001 is the code given to the weapons production at Thalmann Werke at this point, and they would make 3 different pistols. They made Walther PPs. They actually made a very small run of Lugers. That was the 1001-2 pistol. And they made P38s, again, a very small number of them. This was the predominant pistol that they manufactured. Production began in 1953 and would run until 1957. Let's take a closer look at it. Mechanically, this is basically a 6th pattern Walther PP. There are a couple of little differences. The tang on this is a little bit longer than a true Walther. It's missing the step at the bottom of the trigger guard. And these do have loaded chamber indicators in them. You can see that little pin there. When there's a case in the chamber, that protrudes outward, so you can see it. If the hammer's cocked, you can feel it as well. Unfortunately, and for reasons that totally elude me, essentially this entire batch of these East German pistols out of Ethiopia have broken and missing safety levers. So no clue how that happened or why, but that's pretty much standard practice for these. Although that is a totally stock standard Walther PP safety, so it can be easily replaced. I should also point out these originally were issued with two matching numbered magazines. The magazines were also marked 1001 for the factory production code. Unfortunately, the ones coming in from Ethiopia here do not have their magazines. So I think they're going to be supplying them with reproduction triple K mags or something like that. But these originally use a magazine that is an exact copy of the standard 32 caliber Walther PP magazine. So 7-round capacity, and any standard Walther mag will fit. The most substantial marking is here on the left side of the slide. 1001 was the designation, the code designation for Ernst Thalmann Werke. -0 is the code for this pistol, caliber 7.65, that's 32 ACP. They did also make these in 22 caliber. Those are marked 1001-0-cal 5.6. There was also a run of 200 that were made in 9mm Kurz in 380 caliber. Those are actually marked -3 -cal 9K. Those were made specifically for the Stasi, and apparently they weren't actually issued. They were made and then put into storage. But that's the marking you'll see here. By the way, a little aside, apparently about 3,000 of these were imported in the late 1980s by way of Hammerly, and those have fake markings added to them to make them more easily importable because, of course, it didn't have good relations with East Germany at the time. So if you see one of these that's marked AC, which is the World War II German code for Walther, and like made in Zella Mehlis or made in Germany, those are fake. This is the way the pistol was actually made. Those other stamps were just added to, well, sort of cheat the import process. Next, this is a little difficult to see, but there are a pair of East German proof marks on here, one on the slide, one on the frame. And then you will typically see an AB70 in a little circle of dots on the rear tang. That is the East German Ministry of the Interior inspector mark, stamped on there as like final approval of the pistols. Apparently, you'll also find some marked AB9. That was one of the other inspectors in the same plant for a different branch of the German Ministry of the Interior. The ones I've seen here have all been 70. On the other side, we have a serial number on the frame down here and a serial number on the slide. Some of the ones in this batch, including this one, have had the slides scrubbed. You can see the remnants of a number up there, and it didn't match. Originally, they all matched. Some of the ones out of Ethiopia match, many of them don't. Here's an example of one that is matching, so 18591, 18591. That's what you would typically expect. And you can see that same standard marking on the slide. One of the other cool things about getting to take a look at these here at Interordnance, while they're still at their original importer, is being able to see them all as a batch. I have not been able to find any information published about what the actual production run of these was. It ran apparently from 53 to 1957, and that would be, by the way, because in 1958, Ernst Thalmann Werke started making the East German Makarov, which would replace this in new issue. But nobody seems to know how many were made. Well, there are probably about 200 here at Interordnance, and that means I was able to go through them and look at all the serial numbers. This is the lowest one that I was able to dig out, so that we can see that they certainly started below 1,000. They probably started at 1. Best I can tell, they did start at 1, so 700 there. And then the highest number that I was able to find is 19,891, and there are actually the numbers are well distributed between those two. This one's actually mismatched, but it has another 19,000 block slide serial number. And what this tells me is that we're probably looking at a production run of 20,000. The numbers that are in evidence here at Interordnance are well distributed, and just statistically speaking, if they went over 20,000, we would have expected to see something in that range. There were 3 or 4, if not a couple more of that, in the 19,000 series. So to me, this is pretty good indication that they manufactured 20,000 of them new. In addition, of course, to existing pre-war and wartime pistols that were refurbished and rebuilt by the company. Also, for what it's worth, I think these give a pretty good idea of the condition of these pistols here. So there are some that are in remarkably good shape like this one. There are some that are in more typical Ethiopian shape, a lot of finish worn off, that sort of thing. And mysteriously, like, they all have broken safeties. No idea why on that. So other than that, these are very basic standard Walther PPKs. They take down just like a regular PPK. The machining is relatively crude on them. These are not nearly as nice as, say, a pre-war proper Walther, but they certainly seem to be perfectly functional pistols. They were in service for quite a long time with East Germany. For what it's worth, they did not manufacture any PPKs. They did apparently make these grips for the PPK for use on pre-war and wartime pistols if the existing grips broke. You'll note these look basically like Walther grips, but they don't have the Walther banner logo on them. These are East German made grips. So that's pretty much it, I think. One of the things I really enjoy about looking at some of these guns that are coming in from Ethiopia is seeing examples of things that we just don't normally see on the collector market here in the United States because, well, we didn't have very good relations with East Germany and we weren't buying a lot of surplus from East Germany. So obviously some of them did come in, but I think it's really cool to find a cache like this. Essentially, Ethiopia as a sort of time capsule of this sort of material. So there's something really cool about guns from countries that no longer exist, and East Germany is a prime example of that. By the way, we don't know when these guns actually went to Ethiopia, but they did remain in service in East Germany right up until the reunification with the West, and it was at that point that they were taken out of service. So anyway, big thanks to Interordnance for giving me the chance to take a look at this one and show it to you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.